Imagine living in a world where every word you spoke could be a matter of life and death. Picture yourself walking through the sun-baked streets of ancient Sumer, the world's first great civilization, where the air is thick with the scent of baked bread and the distant sound of temple bells. You greet your neighbor, but behind every smile, there's a hint of caution. Because here in the cradle of civilization, accusing someone of a crime, no matter how certain you are, could cost you your own life. Even if you believed you were telling the truth, the consequences of a false accusation were nothing short of fatal. In Sumer, justice was swift, severe, and terrifyingly final. To understand just how radical and dangerous this system was, let's dive into the terrifying Code of Ur-Nammu. This ancient code, written around 2100 BCE, predates the more famous Code of Hammurabi by centuries. The Code of Ur-Nammu is the oldest surviving law code in human history, a relic from a time when writing itself was still a new invention. Imagine the awe and fear these laws inspired, carved into clay tablets and displayed for all to see. The Sumerians believed that order was the only thing standing between them and chaos, and their laws reflected that belief with brutal clarity. Among the most shocking rules in the Code of Ur-Nammu was Law #11. It stated that if you accused someone of murder, theft, or sorcery and you couldn't prove your claim, you would be executed. Not fined, not imprisoned, executed. The stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just a warning against lying, it was a deadly gamble with your own life as the wager. The law didn't care if you were acting out of genuine concern or personal vendetta. If you failed to provide solid evidence, you paid the ultimate price. The message was clear. In Sumer, words could kill. Why so extreme? Why would a society risk silencing its own people with such a harsh penalty? In ancient Mesopotamia, society was fragile. The city-states of Sumer were constantly threatened by war, famine, and internal strife. Wild accusations could spark angry mobs, feuds, and even civil unrest. A single rumor could destroy reputations, families, and entire communities. The leaders of Sumer knew that unchecked accusations could tear their society apart. So, they created a law so severe that it forced people to think twice before speaking out. The threat of death was meant to keep order, to prevent witch hunts, and to stop the spread of chaos before it could begin. This law was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it protected the innocent from false accusations and mob justice. It forced people to weigh their words carefully, to consider the consequences before making a claim. On the other hand, it created a climate of fear and silence. Only the brave, or the powerful, would dare to accuse anyone of a serious crime. For the poor and powerless, the risk was almost unimaginable. Speaking out could mean losing everything, even your life. The law may have been written in clay, but its impact was etched into the lives of every Sumerian. The wealthy and influential could more easily gather witnesses or sway the courts, while the poor faced an almost impossible challenge. If you were a commoner, accusing someone of a crime was a terrifying prospect. You had to be absolutely certain, and even then, you needed the courage to risk everything. The law was supposed to create order, but it also reinforced the power of the elite and kept the lower classes in check. Trials in ancient Sumer were far from simple. If you dared to accuse someone, you had to swear a solemn oath before the gods themselves. This wasn't just a legal formality, it was a sacred ritual, a moment of truth in the eyes of both men and deities. The Sumerians believed that the gods watched over every trial, ready to punish liars and reward the honest. But if you couldn't gather credible witnesses to support your claim, your fate was sealed. The punishment for a failed accusation was often death by drowning, a grim and public spectacle meant to serve as a warning to all. The process was designed to be intimidating. Imagine standing in a crowded temple, the eyes of your community and the gods upon you. You raise your hand, swear your innocence, and hope that your witnesses will stand by your side. If they falter, if your evidence is weak, you know what awaits you. The river, cold and merciless, is the final judge. The fear of this ordeal kept most people silent, even when they suspected wrongdoing. Justice in Sumer was not just about truth, it was about survival. When we compare the Code of Ur-Nammu to the later Code of Hammurabi, the differences are striking. Hammurabi's code, written centuries later in Babylon, was famous for its principle of an eye for an eye. But even Hammurabi's laws were less severe when it came to false accusations. Instead of execution, liars were usually fined or punished in other ways. The Babylonians recognized the dangers of false claims, but they stopped short of making the penalty fatal. In Sumer, however, the law was absolute. There was no room for error, no second chances. The result was a society where the rich and powerful held all the cards. They could afford to take risks, to gather witnesses, to influence the courts. The poor, meanwhile, lived in fear of both the law and those who enforced it. The Code of Ur-Nammu may have stopped false claims, but it also created a world where justice was often out of reach for the most vulnerable. The law was supposed to protect the innocent, but in practice, it often protected the powerful. The legacy of the Code of Ur-Nammu is a complicated one. On the surface, it was a bold attempt to create order in a dangerous world. But beneath that order was a system that demanded silence, obedience, and fear. The Sumerians believed that only the gods could truly judge right from wrong, and their laws reflected that uncertainty. Every accusation was a leap of faith, every trial a test of courage and conviction. So imagine yourself in ancient Sumer. Would you risk everything to speak out against a crime, knowing that failure meant certain death? Would you trust your neighbors, your friends, your own courage, or would you stay silent, hoping that justice would find its own way? The Code of Ur-Nammu challenges us to think about the price of justice, the power of fear, and the meaning of truth. Let me know in the comments, what would you do if you lived under the world's oldest and deadliest law code?